and we can get started. Welcome to Elevate Today. I'm Walt here with life coach Cindie Chavez. Today is Wednesday, November the 6th, 2019. Happy Neville Day, everybody. It is 4 p.m. in New York. That's 1 p.m. Los Angeles time. 9 p.m. in London, and I had to double check all the times because everybody's doing daylight savings time changes. So it's currently 6 a.m. in Tokyo and 8 a.m. in Sydney, Australia. But wherever you are in the world, thanks for joining us for another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And I'm happy that we're back to doing Neville again. And Cindie, also, I'm happy because you'll remember in the last week I was telling people about how I've manifested a bunch of money and the check showed up today. So I was really, really happy the check showed up. Yay. It was so cool.
Yes. I've been really having a lot of fun with that affirmation that we learned a couple chapters back. The affirmation was just, isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening for me now.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a situation with one of the kids where I was wanting to energetically help them manifest something they were working on. And then I didn't want to just be favoring like one child, so I was saying, isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening for all of our kids now. And I just kept saying it over and over. And I really have seen some wonderful things happen with that. I'm really happy about that affirmation. It's really powerful. And so when you were talking about that last week, remember I said, well, I'm just going to keep saying,
right.
Isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening for Walt now. It's like, I've just been saying it for everyone.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it very, very much. Yeah. my bank account appreciates it. My wife appreciates it. My creditors appreciate it. This is very good.
And this daylight savings time, I just don't know what to say. Yesterday it was 5:15 and it was pitch black outside. Every window was completely pitch black. And Scott said something to me like, well, isn't this strange that we're eating dinner at like midnight? Because it really felt, and I was trying to figure that out. I'm like, okay, 3 days ago, before daylight savings, it was not this dark at 6:15. I can only turn the clock back an hour, and it just must be at that perfect timing when everything starts going in that direction. So it always affects me the same way, and that is that by 7 o'clock, I'm done. I feel like it's 2 a.m. I'm so tired. So it has to show you that our thoughts, right, create everything.
Because no doubt.
How did that affect me so much? You thought that I would just flown back from Greece or something. I was so jet lagged because of the little 1 hour time change.
Perspective is truly everything. There's no doubt about it.
Right?
Absolutely no doubt. But it's all good. And I have also been using our affirmation. One of the things I've discovered about it is, some good things have been happening. But also, it's a really good one to use when I'm not feeling good.
It's a great vibe lifter.
It is. It just picks you right up. I was finding that a couple times in the middle of the night. I'd wake up and, maybe you have trouble getting back to sleep. I was having a little trouble getting back to sleep. And then the mind starts to go off into all these different directions you really don't want to go off into. And then I started using that. And it was a great sleep inducer. I mean, it just knocked me out in 5 minutes, something like that, in half the time it normally would. So I'm loving it just for that. Plus, like you say, when you stick to the affirmation, not just, once a day, but periodically throughout the day, and you're doing it for other people, and I've been doing the same thing too, it just feels good.
I texted it to someone and I said, put this affirmation on autopilot.
Yeah, right.
Just put it on autopilot. Just say it. Just say it in your mind over and over. I think there's something powerful about the structure of it, actually. And I know the person that invented it all we know about them is that they were so down and had so many needs of so many things that they got frustrated trying to make a list of what they needed. And they said, I'm just going to have to hope for something wonderful because I can't even dwell on how many things I need. But the structure of it, language structure of it, It's like we are telling our brain, we are not questioning
Right.
whether something wonderful is happening. We are not asking for something wonderful to happen. We're not even trying to convince ourselves, like, I believe something wonderful, because we're just exclaiming how wonderful it is. Isn't it wonderful? And I think that affects our subconscious in a certain way. It's sort of like, what do they call affirmations instead of affirmations?
Okay.
So I think an affirmation, or there's a way to frame it in a question where it's like, why is this so easy? Or why is so much money coming to me this week? And it's kind of confusing to the brain because it's not the way we usually phrase things. And I think this one is one of those. So I don't know, I'm having fun with it.
That's a good thing. Well, actually, you reminded me of the source. And what we did know about the source is it was a woman, I believe in her 50s. I don't believe she had any family. She had no income. She didn't have a steady place to live. She had no job. And I'm thinking to that time, I mean, the 1930s for a woman who was on her own, that was rough all by itself.
Yeah, and I think she said she either didn't have transportation or her transportation wasn't reliable to go look for a job. So it was just sort of like everything that could go wrong was going wrong.
It was a rough place to be in. So you can almost imagine her just trying to reach for, okay, what can I focus on? Because the list was too big. There were too many things that needed fixing. And you can kind of just see her fixating on this, like, wow, that just feels good. I don't even know if it's effective. I don't even know if it fits what Neville's teaching me, but it just feels good, so I'm going with it. You know?
I love it. I think it's great. I hope everyone will keep on with it, and we'll get some reports back of people telling us.
Yeah, please.
The people that I was saying it for actually had a result that they were in a position where they were at the last minute and something had to happen.
Oh, nice.
And I said, here, fall asleep saying this tonight. And I will too. And I did. And I got a note back. It was like, everything that needed to happen has happened.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that's fun.
It's really fun. Yeah. It's also encouraging, like, yes, it's actually good first aid. It works.
Right. It works.
Yeah. Also, another piece of fun news, we've been kind of promising it for about a couple weeks now, but the second episode of our fiction audio play that Alex and I have been working on, The Grass is Greener, is now out. It is now published today.
Yay!
So those of you who are subscribers are already getting it. Those who are not subscribers, if you wanted to subscribe to it, I don't think I've been giving the address out, but it's pretty easy. Just go to thegrassisgreener.loatoday.net and you'll be able to do the same kind of subscription that you did when you first signed up for LOA Today. And oh, by the way, for those 10 to 15% who aren't subscribing yet to LOA Today, jump on the boat. And you do the same thing. You just go to loatoday.net. You don't have to do the first part because obviously it's a different website. But just go to loatoday.net and right at the top of the page, you'll also have instructions on how to link into the podcast. And I do know I've been asking certain people who I'm close to, including a couple of new co-hosts, to let me know about how the subscription process works for them when they try it out. And so far, it's been all flags flying. Everything's been very easy. So I am convinced once again that the subscription process is really easy. It's just a few clicks and you're done. And like you said, you can also catch us on YouTube. I mean, because we are live streaming this with video to YouTube. So you can join people if you want to. You can join people like Jeffrey, who is practically here every day. Oh, we have somebody else. I don't think I recognize the name, but hi, Mo. Thank you for joining us. And you can actually listen to us live and enter questions into the chat area, and we try to incorporate those into the podcast as well. So, and by the way, if either of you guys or anyone else wants to join us on the live stream and tell us about any stories that you have to tell us about using the phrase, using the affirmation, isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening for me now. We'd love to incorporate that story as well.
Yeah, really. Yeah. And I am excited about the Grass is Greener show because it's great.
It is. I'm loving it, and I mean I probably is the person who would love it the least because I have to do all the editing work, go through do the picayune stuff and create all the sound backgrounds and all the background noises of people walking across the floor or picking up the phone and all that kind of thing. It gets pretty tedious after a while. But even with all that, the second episode actually we kind of took some steps forward because. From a sound perspective, because first of all, I think you're going to find that the quality of the sound is clearer. There was a little bit of distortion in the first episode. And secondly, I realized to myself, you know what? I have two channels. I have stereo here. I could actually create a two-dimensional sound stage here. So
Sure.
that's what I was doing. I was making it sound like people were in different parts of the room and so forth.
Excellent.
So
Oh, I
that
can't
was
wait.
fun.
I can't wait.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that was
really
very fun.
enjoyed the first one. And of course, the first one left us at a cliffhanger. So
Oh, yes.
I've been waiting. So I'm very happy to have the second edition. Yay.
And I'll also leave a second cliffhanger in that Alex has written a second cliffhanger into the end of the second
Of
episode. So you have
course.
something to look forward to.
Of course. That's good writing. Okay.
That's right, yes.
All right. Well, we are at chapter 12 with just this chapter and then 3 more, and then we're finished with this particular book. So we've been making our way through Neville Goddard's book, The Law and the Promise, his big book that was at the end of, is it the last? I think it's the last book that he wrote.
It is, yes.
And so in the book, he has incorporated not just teaching and not just methods and practical ways to use them, but also the success stories of people who attended his lectures, read his books, and then wrote him letters saying, look what happened. And
Right.
they're so much fun to read and to hear about. It's just always hearing a good success story is very inspiring to me. So that's where we are. Are you ready to dive in?
I certainly am. I can hardly wait, especially when I saw the title of the chapter. And I'll tell you why. It's because attitude, which is the title of the chapter, attitude is a big deal for me lately. I've been really working on my own. I've been trying to be supportive to my wife with her efforts to work on her attitude, which, by the way, is doing very well. I'm really realizing how important it is from a moment-to-moment perspective in life. Because that, if there's anything we have control over, moment to moment, it's our attitude. It's
Yes.
the easiest thing to control. Of all the things that we want to try to control, it's the easiest one. So,
Right.
I mean, I'm really looking forward to see what Neville has to say, but I think it's really important.
It always, whenever I think about us having control over a mental process, like a thought or an attitude, sometimes that doesn't seem really easy because we're not used to practicing.
True. Very true.
And so it can be difficult at first to take back, if you will, control of our mind, of our attitude, of our thoughts. But once we start practicing and we get into it, it gets easier and easier. And like you said, it is one of the few things we actually do have complete control over if we will exercise it.
That's right.
I remember a story. I think it was my sister was talking to somebody, 10 years or so ago. We were first learning about law of attraction, and she was telling somebody, your thoughts control everything. Your thoughts control everything, and you control your thoughts. And the person said, I don't control my thoughts. And my sister said, well, who does? It always makes me laugh because really, like, if you don't, then who is? So, all right. So Neville starts this chapter off. The chapter's called Attitudes, and it starts off with a quote from Blake. It says, mental things are alone real. What is called corporeal, nobody knows of its dwelling place. It is in fallacy, and its existence in imposture. Where is the existence out of mind or thought? Where is it but in the mind of a fool? And then Neville says memory, though faulty, is adequate to call for sameness. If we remember another as we've known him, we recreate him in that image, and the past will be recognized in the present. Imagining creates reality. If there is room for improvement, we should reconstruct him with new content, visualize him as we would like him to be, rather than have him bear the burden of our memory of him. And then he quotes Blake again, everything possible to be believed is an image of truth.
Now, there's a point to be made here, I think, because Neville is really sparse in his use of bolds and italics, and he put the words imagining creates reality in italics. And at least in my, I'm not sure if he did in the version you have, but the version I have has that in italics.
Yeah, no, mine doesn't. And but I think that's important because what he's told us again and again, and that I find interesting because I don't think this is something that we hear in a lot of other law of attraction teaching. And that is that memory, when we're creating from memory as opposed to imagining, that our memory can only pull up things that have the way they were or the way we've already experienced them. And so when we only create from memory, we just keep creating the same thing over and over. And I think that's an interesting idea because I haven't really heard anybody else talk about it.
That's true. Yeah, and it's also a great thing. I think it's a great thing to remind ourselves of the fact that if all we draw upon is memory, we keep experiencing the same stuff over and over again. Well, if we like the stuff that's been happening, that's great. If we don't like the stuff that's happening, there's a clue about what we need to do. We need to change what we're mapping to.
Right. It's that idea of focusing on yesterday's news.
Yeah.
And creating another day of that same story. And so it's so interesting. We taught a method before. I do this with clients occasionally, and we taught it on the podcast once of a conversation that didn't go the way we wanted. And I'm sure we've all had at least one of those in our life, right?
Oh, a few, yeah.
If we will go back and remember it, but not just remember it, because that's what we usually do. We go back and we replay that conversation in our head. And of course, that causes us to re-feel all the things we didn't like to feel in the first place. But if we'll go back and replay it and reimagine it to be more like we wanted it to be, so that we said the things we wish we would have said, and so that the other person says things that we wanted them to say, then we start changing the conversation and we change the emotional response to it in our body, and everything starts to shift. And that reminds me of this. It's like, instead of just remembering it over and over, let's give it some new life in the direction that we want to hear it.
It's interesting you mentioned that. That's what Neville calls the pruning shears of revision, going back and revising the old message. And the reason I say it's interesting is I've been doing a fair amount of that lately. And in my doing it, I've really it's kind of been rubbed in my face just how strong the subconscious messages that I have built up over time really are. Because I'll replay one of those things, I'll turn it into what I want it to be, and within a split second my mind will say, no, it actually went this way. Replay the old one all over again. I mean, it's almost like insisting, like, no, that's not the story.
That's right. And that's what our subconscious does. I've been doing some really stellar work with clients for the past month, and a lot of it is focused around that and how much that old story will start to argue for itself.
That's
like,
right.
Oh, no, it really is true. It's like, no. Oh, wow. So we're going to hear a story. Neville says the following story is by one who believes that imagining creates reality, and acting on this belief changed his attitude toward a stranger and bore witness to this change in reality. So here's the story he received. More than 20 years ago, when I was a green farm boy, newly arrived in Boston to attend school, a panhandler asked me for money for a meal. Although the money I had was pitifully insufficient for my own needs, I gave him what was in my pocket. A few hours later, the same man, by this time staggering drunk, stopped me again and asked for money. I was so outraged to think that the money I could so ill afford had been put to such use. I made myself a solemn pledge that I would never again listen to the plea of a street beggar. Through the years, I kept my pledge, but every time I refused anyone, my conscience needled me. I felt guilty, even to the point of developing a sharp pain in my stomach, but I couldn't bring myself to unbend. The early part of this year, a man stopped me as I was walking my dog and asked for money so he could eat. True to the old pledge, I refused him. His manner was gracious as he accepted my refusal. He even admired my dog and spoke of a family in New York State he knew that raised Cocker Spaniels. This time my conscience was really pricking me. As he went on his way, I determined to remake that scene as I wished it would have been. So I stopped right there on the street, closed my eyes for only a few moments, and enacted the scene differently. In my imagination, I had the same man approach me, only this time he opened the conversation by admiring my dog. After we had talked a moment, I had him say, "I don't like to ask you this, but I really need something to eat. I have a job that begins tomorrow morning, but I've been out of work and tonight I'm hungry. I then reached into my imaginary pocket, pulled out an imaginary $5 bill, and gladly gave it to him. This imaginal act immediately dissolved the guilty feeling and the pain. I know from your teaching that as an imaginal act is fact. So I knew I could grant anyone what he asked, and by faith in the imaginal act, consent to the reality of his having it. 4 months later, as I was again walking my dog, the same man approached me and opened the conversation by admiring my dog. "Here's a beautiful dog," he said. "Young man, I suppose you remember me. I don't suppose you remember me, but a while back I asked you for some money, and you very kindly said no. I say kindly because if you had given it to me, I would still be asking for money. Instead, I got a job that very next morning, and now I'm on my feet and have some self-respect again." I knew his job was a fact when I imagined it that night some 4 months before, but I won't deny there was immense satisfaction in having him appear in the flesh to confirm it.
Wow. I like that story for a couple of reasons. First of all, most Neville stories are stories where the storyteller relates a scene that they imagined, and then the scene plays out exactly the way they imagined it, which is not the way many manifestation stories are told, but that's the way Neville stories are usually told.
Yes, right, correct.
In this case, the scene played out similarly, but not the same way as the man played it out in his mind. Instead, what actually played out was, instead of the man already having a job, he got a job.
Yeah,
I'm thinking,
I love it.
That's very cool.
Isn't it cool?
That was really an unexpected result. I mean, I think he was focusing on it because he wanted to experience the scene differently. What he ended up doing was supporting this other guy's need to have employment, to have work.
Right. And something else, I think it's funny, not funny. This happens to us a lot because I didn't know this was the story. And we talked about reimagining and conversation, and boom, here's the story. But what was interesting is that he talked about how every time he refused someone that had asked him for money, how he felt pain, and even physical pain, like a pain in his stomach, and he felt really guilty. And he said, "Oh, this nice person that was commenting about how nice his dog was, this was really getting him this time." Yeah. And how he said that when he took the time to make the conversation new again, the way he wanted it to go, that the guilty pain went away.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting, that it really does. Like our mind is so connected to our emotions, and our emotions are felt in our body. And so as soon as he did this, that guilt went away, and the pain that he experienced from the guilt also went away. I thought that was pretty powerful.
I agree.
It's interesting. He may have revisioned this because the guilt got to him. Like it was getting to him and he wanted to change it. He didn't want to feel that way. So he went ahead and revised the story, and then look at the outcome. So awesome.
What an interesting thing. That's an interesting technique. I never really thought about doing something like that. Reimagining something in order to remove guilt.
Yeah, guilt or any kind of emotion that's not feeling good about it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I should have realized that you could do it with guilt as with anything else, but why not, Especially something like that where, it's not like he was really guilty of anything. The guilt was self-imposed,
Sure.
But nevertheless, he recognized the guilt that he had imposed upon himself to such an extent that he said, "You know what? I don't really have to live with this anymore. I don't want to live with it. I don't have to. So I'm going to revision it out of existence and replace it with something I prefer." Right. And got an amazing result out of the whole thing.
And not only for himself, but for someone else. Yeah. And the idea with guilt is that guilt actually serves a purpose, and it's not to make us feel crappy forever. It's to show us what we value. And this man clearly had a value around helping people.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time he was approached as a newcomer to Boston and with not very much money at all, and as a student, someone asked him for money, and he gladly gave him the little bit that he had. So, I mean, he definitely had a value around generosity, around helping people. Mm-hmm. And then, seeing the person misuse the money, or in his mind misuse the money, upset him, and he made this vow to himself but you still see that his guilt showing up every time he refused someone was showing you that he still had a higher value around giving.
He did. Yeah. It's true.
So it all worked out in a very cool way.
No doubt about it. Yeah, really good story. I like that one.
Yeah. So Neville says, he quotes Acts, I have no silver and gold, but I give you what I have. None is to be discarded, all must be saved, and our imagination reshaping memory is the process whereby this salvation is brought to pass. To condemn the man for having lost his way is to punish the already punished. Oh, whom should I pity if I pity not the sinner who is gone astray? He's quoting Blake from Jerusalem. Not what the man was, but what he may become should be our imaginal activity. And this is a perfect example of that. It's easier to watch someone else do it, I think, sometimes, right? Because we're looking at a person, especially if it's somebody we know and we haven't been happy with their behavior or whatever. It's really easy for us to say, no, I know what this person's about, instead of use that same energy to imagine that they've improved their life or that things are better for them.
Good practice, though, because when we start consciously doing that, we start shifting that pattern that we talked about at the top of the show, where we imagine the same things every day because we just keep playing the same old memories every day. Well, now all of a sudden we're changing it, making new memories.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Neville goes on to quote Georges Marey says, "Don't you remember sweet Alice, Ben Bolt, sweet Alice whose hair was so brown, who wept with delight when you gave her a smile and trembled with fear at your frown?" He says, if we imagine no worse of him than he of himself, he would pass as excellent. It's not the man at his best, but the imaginist exercising the spirit of forgiveness that performs the miracle. Imagining with new content transformed both the man who asked and the man who gave. That's the part I think so great about this story, is that both people were served.
Yes.
Both people were helped. Imagining has not yet had its due in the systems either of moralists or educators. He quotes Isaiah, when it does, there will be the opening of the prison to those who are bound. Nothing has existence for us save through the memory we have of it. Therefore, we should remember it not as it was, unless, of course, it was altogether desirable, but as we desire it to be. That's what you said a moment ago. It's like, unless things are really going the way you want them to, why not imagine them better?
Exactly.
Inasmuch as imagining is creative, our memory of another either furthers or hinders him and makes his upward or downward way easier and swifter. There is no coal of character so dead that it will not glow and flame if but slightly turned. So, I have a question about this.
Okay.
When I read Neville saying that our memory of someone either furthers or hinders him, it makes his upward or downward way easier and swifter. And it's really interesting because what Neville's saying is that my memory of someone and the way I picture someone has an actual effect on their trajectory. It either supports them in becoming, either further or hindering. And that's interesting to me because I would think that each person was responsible for their own progress.
I think it's true. Neville makes an interesting comment, and I think it's relevant to a topic that's been kind of important to me over the last week or so, in conversations that I've had, mainly online with people. The way he phrases it is, let's see if I got the exact thing. The imaginist exercising the spirit of forgiveness is the one that performs the miracle, he says. And I think that's the way most Neville students understand Neville. I mean, that's pretty much what Neville is teaching. But I'd like to make a point that I think kind of modifies what Neville is saying there. Because really, in my view, everyone is an independent actor. We're all connected, but we're all independent. It's both at the same time. Independent doesn't mean that we're completely divorced from everybody else. It just means we behave on our own path in our own way for our own needs and interests, pursuing our own lives. And the lives are not the same as our neighbors. They're different. Everybody has different choices, different preferences, different likes, different dislikes, and so on and so forth, which is wonderful. It's part of what makes the diversity of humankind so great. But along with that, I think there comes a certain level of respect because, yes, we are all creators. Yes, we are all able to create. And this is where I think I personally think we need to think in terms of a little bit of a boundary here, that I can help you. I can reinforce you. And indeed, all of Neville's stories are about people who help other people.
Yep.
You ever find a Neville story where the protagonist is forcing his will on somebody else? You never find a Neville story where the protagonist is making the other person behave in a way the other person doesn't want to behave. That's not part of what Neville teaches. So when Neville says something like, but the imaginist exercising the spirit of forgiveness that performs the miracle, when he's making that point, he's basically kind of challenging us to say, well, yes, we are the ones who are doing the imagining, and therefore there is a miracle in that. But many people turn that into that the miracle being performed was performed to somebody else. It was done on them.
Got it.
And that's not the miracle.
Right. So, and the idea too that he's talking about the imaginist, which isn't everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish it were.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm holding a vision for someone and they don't even know about it, they may not be imagining anything for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But the other part that's important to remember here is that when Neville talks about spirit of forgiveness, it's important to remember that in Nevilleese, that when he talks about sin, he's going back to the original language, and that word does not mean a moral failure. It doesn't mean doing something wrong or evil. It literally means missing the mark. Like I shot an arrow at the target and I didn't hit the bullseye, or maybe I'd missed the target altogether. And to forgive that sin is just to go again and do a better job and shoot the target where it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he's talking about us imagining or remembering someone as they are, and says that we create a miracle if we have the spirit of forgiveness, I think what he's saying is reimagining it in a better way.
Yeah.
Or reimagining the person having a better experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like with this man that reimagined the man saying, oh, I've got a job tomorrow morning. That was so much better for him. It was so much for the man doing the imagining.
Mm-hmm.
It was such a better experience to have a person come up and say, oh, your dogs are really beautiful and I really feel terrible asking this, but I've got a job lined up that starts tomorrow, but tonight I need food. That was better for him than for him to imagine, hey, buddy, you got any cash?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that was the spirit of forgiveness.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because the way it happened in his mind the first time, it missed the mark. And he recreated it in a way that hit the bullseye for him.
That's true.
Right?
That's very true. Yeah. I also want to bring another aspect of this in, though. I'm going to, there's the old joke about there are two kinds of people in the world, those who divide the world into two kinds of people and those who do not. Well, I'm going to divide the world into four kinds of people, okay?
Okay.
So it's not so much four kinds of people, it's four different kinds of situations. All of them are situations where I'm going to imagine about somebody else, okay?
Okay.
One is where I am imagining in a way that is sympathetic to the other person,
Okay.
and that person is at least receptive to that. They may not be focusing on it, but they're receptive to that perspective.
Okay.
The second is where I'm focusing on the other person in a positive way, but they're not receptive to it. They're just in a bad space. They're in one of those really depressed spaces. Third situation is where I'm going to try to focus something negatively, like I'm going to curse them, that kind of thing. And
Okay.
they're in a good space. And then the fourth situation is I'm going to think negatively and they're in a bad space. Okay, so those are our four scenarios. And my claim is that in the first scenario, where you're both in a good space, and in the last scenario, where you're both in a bad space, those are going to reinforce each other. But the second and third are going to work at cross purposes, and they're just going to kind of bounce off each other. They're not going to reinforce each other.
Right.
And that's what I believe anyway. Now, I'm not sure that is precisely what Neville is saying, but take that idea and then let's take it one step further. Neville, and I'm going to go back to that quote that I mentioned that he said. The full sentence was, "It's not the man at his best, but the imaginist exercising the spirit of forgiveness that performs the miracle." What's the miracle? Most people reading that say the miracle is I got the guy a job. The guy got a job. That was the miracle. But I don't think that's what the miracle was.
I think the miracle is that he dissolved his own guilt and
Yes.
pain. Yeah.
And he put himself into a space of alignment with what the other person was wanting and feeling and desiring. That's
Right.
the miracle. They both got themselves into the same place, and in the process of doing that, they both got wonderful results out of it. That's the miracle.
Yeah,
It
I
isn't
think-
that he manipulated the other person's space to make that person have a job.
Right. So I think the miracle, was it ended up being much bigger than what he intended.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's interesting.
yeah, that's
all
important to me.
Definitely. Yeah. All right. So we've got another story.
Cool.
Neville says the following story shows that imagining can make rings and husbands and move people to China.
Ooh, okay.
No idea.
Gee, I wonder where this is going.
So here's this. The story says, my husband, child of a broken home and raised by beloved grandparents, was never close to his mother, nor she to him. A woman of 63 and a divorcee for 32 of those years, she was lonely and embittered. And my relationship with her was strained as I attempted to stay in the middle. By her own admission, her great desire was to remarry for companionship, but she believed this to be impossible at her age. My husband would often state to me that he hoped she would remarry and, as he fervently put it, perhaps live way out of town. I had the same wish, and as I put it, perhaps move to China. Being wary of my personal motive for this wish, I knew I must change my feeling toward her in my imaginal drama and at the same time give her what she wanted. I began by seeing her in my imagination as a completely changed personality, a happy, joyous woman, secure and contented in a new relationship. Every time I thought of her, I would see her mentally as a new woman. About 3 weeks later, she came to our house for a visit, bringing a friend she had met many months previously. The man had recently become a widower. He was her age, secure financially, and had grown children and grandchildren. We liked him, and I was excited because it was obvious they liked each other. But my husband still thought it was impossible. I didn't. From that day on, every time her image rose in my mind, I saw her extending her left hand toward me, and I admired the ring on her finger. 1 month later, she and her friend came to visit us, and as I walked forward to greet them, she proudly extended her left hand. The ring was on her finger. 2 weeks later, she was married, and we haven't seen her since. She lives in a brand new home way out of town, and as her new husband dislikes the long drive to her house, she might as well have moved to China.
That's funny. I like that. That's cute. She
this
might
is
as well have moved to China.
This is another story that I think it's funny because if you look through the story, the first part, when she started imagining that her mother-in-law was happy and joyous,
Right.
She says about 3 weeks later. And so then she started imagining her extending her hand with a ring on it. And she says 2 weeks later, she was married.
Mhm.
And I always think that's funny. It's like, boy, these people had these things moving pretty quickly.
It is very quick, yeah.
Right?
And it's quickness is one of those things that is, again, what your perspective is. Because if you're in a really bad place, it can't happen fast enough. But
Right,
if you're looking
right.
at what somebody else is going through, 2 weeks, you say, wow, that was really quick.
True. So Neville says there is a wide difference between the will to resist an activity and the decision to change it. He who changes an activity acts, whereas he who resists an activity reacts.
Mm.
One creates and the other perpetuates.
In your version, is reacts broken up hyphenetically? He's got a hyphen in this one. It's
Well,
RE
there's a-
hyphen ACTS.
Yeah, there's a hyphen, but it's at the edge. So I thought that the hyphen was only there because the word acts was on the next line, but maybe
Oh,
hyphenated on purpose just to show the difference between action and reaction.
that's what I was thinking. Because for my
Yeah.
copy, it is in the middle of the line. It's not on the end of the line,
Okay.
and it makes a lot of sense in the sense that it kind of reminds us when we're like he says, he who changes an activity acts, whereas he who resists an activity reacts. Resisting an activity is basically saying, I'm going to go back to my old pattern again.
Yeah.
When you're going back to your old pattern, you're basically reacting. So I loved it when I saw the hyphen in there. That's why I was wondering if you had it.
Yeah. And how he says one creates and the other perpetuates.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
we perpetuate a lot.
We certainly do.
He says nothing is real beyond the imaginative patterns we make of it. Memory, no less than desire, resembles a daydream. Why make it a daymare? Man can forgive only if he treats memory as a daydream and shapes it to his heart's desire. R.K. learned that we may rob others of their abilities by our attitudes toward them. He changed his attitude and thereby changed a fact. So here's the story that goes with that intro. I'm not a moneylender, nor am I in the investment business as such. But a friend and business acquaintance came to me for a substantial loan in order to expand his plant. Because of a personal friendship, I granted the loan with reasonable interest rates, and I gave my friend the right of renewal at the end of 1 year. When the first term expired, he was behind in his interest payments and requested a 30-day extension on the note. I granted this request, but at the end of 30 days, he was still unable to meet the note and asked for an additional extension. As I previously stated, I'm not in the business of lending money. Within 20 days, I needed full payment of the loan to meet debts of my own. But I consented again to extend the note, although my own credit was now in serious jeopardy. The natural thing to do was to apply legal pressure to collect. And a few years ago, I would have done just that. Instead, I remembered your warning not to rob others of their ability. And I realized that I had been robbing my friend of his ability to pay what he owed. For 3 nights, I constructed a scene in my imagination in which I heard my friend tell me that unexpected orders had flooded his desk so rapidly he was now able to pay the loan in full. The 4th day, I received a telephone call from him. He told me that by what he called a miracle, he had received so many orders, and big ones too, he was now able to pay back my loan, including all interest due. And in fact, he had just mailed a check to me for the entire amount. There's nothing more fundamental to the secret of imagining than the distinction between imagining and the state imagined. Mental things are alone real. Everything possible to be believed is an image of the truth.
Two comments out of that. First, here's a case where the check being in the mail is really a good thing.
Well, what I like about it is that instead of worrying that this guy wasn't able to pay him, instead of complaining that this guy wasn't able to pay him, which maybe he did all those things at first, but he recognized, he said he remembered Neville saying not to rob someone of their ability by your whatever you were imagining. And I don't remember hearing Neville say that except for in this chapter. But that's pretty powerful, because how many of us that were, expecting something from someone else would just decide that they were going to imagine it happening instead of complaining about it, worrying about it, trying to figure out some other way to deal with it, applying legal pressure, as he said. But instead, he just imagined the outcome that he wanted. And this is so much like the other 2 stories, is that the first guy was trying to alleviate his guilt. The second couple were trying to get rid of the mother-in-law who they weren't fond of. The third one was, trying to get a loan paid to him. But in all 3 cases, as they imagined what they wanted to happen, not only were they blessed with a better outcome, but so was the other person. The woman fell in love and got married. The beggar got a job. And this guy had more business than he knew what to do with and was able to pay his loan. So that's pretty awesome.
It is awesome.
My brain is working on is there anything that, does anybody owe you money? Is there any outcome that you want that you haven't applied this imagination to right
Yeah.
now?
Well, that's a valid question, a very valid question. I was kind of hung up on that same sentence too, although from a slightly different perspective. Although I really like what you said because I think you're right on. But the phrase "I remembered your warning not to rob others of their ability," and you commented that you didn't remember Neville saying that, and I don't really remember Neville saying that either. He
I mean,
may
in
have
the
said that.
past, I remembered it in this chapter, but I don't remember him saying it
Yeah,
in
I,
any other book.
I don't remember it in any of the books. He may have said it in one of his talks. I don't know. But there's a piece of me that wonders if he really said that. I mean, the fact that Neville included it in the story suggests that Neville felt it was at least a worthwhile phrase to include it. But I'm
Hmm.
not sure that if Neville ever said it. And the reason I say that is it ties back to what I talked about before about how there are four different ways that you can be working to influence somebody else. Your state being a good state or a bad state, the other person's being a good state or a bad state, and how that all interacts. And the idea that you can rob somebody else of their ability is kind of along the same lines in my mind as I am going to try to steal something from you even though you're feeling great. And that to me doesn't work. So I'm curious, did Neville really say something like that? And if he did, I have a sneaking suspicion. I can't prove it because I can't even say that I know where he actually said it. But I have a sneaking suspicion that if he did say it, this is a Neville decoder ring situation. I have a
Possibly,
sneak.
yes.
I have a
Um,
sneaking suspicion that if he used that phrase, it was used in a context that had a different meaning from what we would normally associate with robbing somebody else.
what it brings to mind for me is the idea that sometimes I coach other coaches,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things I like to remind other coaches and myself as a coach is that it's really important the vision I hold for a client. So if I have a client that's in dire straits in some way, and that's just how I see him, and I start developing an idea of, oh yeah, they're never going to get victory over this problem,
Mm.
right? They're never gonna get a relationship.
Yeah.
They're a Debbie Downer or whatever phrase
Right.
you want
Right.
to use, right? Yeah, it's not going to happen for them. If I have that going on in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
then I will never be able to take them very far as a coach,
Right.
right? Even if all those things are factual, even if they really are down in the dumps, even if they
Especially.
really are arguing for their limitations, even if they really have experienced all of that. But I have to be able to hold them in a space where I absolutely see their success, and I
Mhm.
know they can be successful. To
Yeah.
be for my work with them to be beneficial, for my work with them to be able to carry them to the place where they do have success. I have to be there. And so when I hear Neville say that, that's what comes up for me is that if the way I picture my client is, yeah, they're never going to get there, I'm robbing them of their ability to get there. At least insofar as their work with me is concerned.
Metaphorically speaking, yes. And I
Right?
think that's the key. That's a metaphor at that point. That's not an actual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Neville's pretty literal most of the time.
Oh, I don't know. I think he's fairly metaphorical.
Well,
I've commented on this a
yeah.
lot.
No, he's hugely metaphorical,
Yeah.
but I think he's most of the time being literal in what he's saying can happen.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. No, that's definitely what he's saying. But the way he expresses it, the wording that he uses is almost always metaphorical or analogical or
Oh,
similar or
yeah.
something like that.
Always,
Yeah.
always. But no, I agree that it's a weird thing to hear him say, and I don't think I've ever heard him say it before. So
I suspect that there's context missing from it. I really do believe that.
we'll find it. We have to do
I
some.
think we probably will. Yeah. Um, there was something else too that I wanted to mention. What was it from? Something from the story? Maybe it was from the end. Oh, um, I know what it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. I have an impression in my memory that Neville has touched upon something that other LOA teachers, other teachers of philosophy and spirituality in general have touched on, and that is that if you put out imaginings of what we might call a negative kind, focusing on stuff that is harmful or hurtful toward others or whatever, it's really only going to bounce back on you. And I have an impression that Neville said something along those same lines.
I do recall him saying something similar to that.
Yeah.
Um, and and yet I also know he has admonished to use these, powers in a way that's good for others.
Right.
And I think of in magic circles, the idea of uncrossing, or the idea of what's called crossed conditions, where, like, someone's really struggling and nothing they do is working, and it's like sometimes people will say that they think they've been cursed or hexed, right? And they'll do some kind of magical working to alleviate that. And I've heard people say, most of the time it is not that someone intentionally decided to do some, like you were talking, the fourth explanation of, I'm sending evil thoughts their way, right? I'm going to hex them. I'm going to put a curse on them. Usually it's not that at all. But sometimes thoughts that are angry and jealous and things like that are pointed at someone may have some kind of energetic response. And I think it has to do with, where the other person is at, like in your description of the 4 people. So if I am in the space where I just can't imagine anything good happening for me, then maybe I'm more open to people's mental arrows shooting at me than if I am like in a space where I have my own power. That goes back to that giving your power away, right? It
does.
And so it is complicated, right? Being human is complicated sometimes.
I think that's also one of the values of the phrase law of attraction. It's not a phrase that Neville used. Neville used law of assumption. He used some other variations.
Right. That's right.
He never really used law of attraction. But I think law of attraction has a really great aspect to it. Because, just look at the word attract. You can't really attract to something else. You can attract to yourself. That's what attraction is. It's like a magnet can't attract a nail over to that tree.
Right.
That's not the way attraction is, And it's a great reminder that truly we are all attractors. So again, going back to the paradigm of me and the other person, and each of us can be in one of 2 different states, generally speaking, and how are we interrelating with each other on those? Essentially, no matter what I am thinking about that other person, whether I'm thinking in a way that I like or in a way that I dislike, or he's thinking in a way that he likes or dislikes, regardless of what the combination is, he's the one who's doing his attracting. I'm the one who's doing my attracting. I am helping reinforce his attracting. And I say that that's even true, even if he is not deliberately focused on that particular thing at that particular time.
Right. And I think that's why it's important being conscious creators, and not, we're all creating stuff, right? But we are attempting to do it consciously. And I think that's why it's important to, like, when I'm working energetically towards someone else's benefit, like in all these stories, I usually communicate that to them, right? Because if somebody is in a really down place and they get a message that says, hey, I'm holding the vision for you of your healing or of your success,
right,
or of whatever, right? To me, number one, that's planting a seed for them to hold that vision as well.
Yes.
And sometimes we're in the place where it's hard to hold a vision for ourselves, where we have a hard time seeing out of the hole we're in.
Exactly.
But just having someone else supporting you and saying, I can see this for you, and I'm holding this vision for you, I think that gives us an opening to see it for ourselves.
Yes.
And then once, even if it's just a little bit, even if it's just climbing out of the hole a little bit, then we can start building some momentum. And so I think that's important, other than, someone that just doesn't know and isn't seeing it for themselves.
I think about the fact that Neville quotes a lot of biblical stuff, a lot of biblical quotes, and how he basically treats all of the actors in the Bible as states of consciousness, as experiences of human consciousness, rather than as real people who walked the earth.
Yeah, he says it's a psychological drama. It's not a historical.
It's a psychological drama, right? Yeah. So I think of the psychological drama of Jesus healing the lame man, and the lame beggar is able to walk after the healing. The way most people think about that is Jesus healed the leg. But the way I think about it, and I'm pretty sure the way Neville thought about it, was Jesus reinforced the man healing his own leg. And the justification of that, I don't remember the exact scripture, but the gist of the scripture is that Jesus said to the man, your faith is pure. You have strong faith. Walk. Get up and walk. He's basically reminding him, you already believe this. You already know this in your mind. You are healing yourself right now. I'm not doing the healing. You're doing it. I'm just reinforcing it for you.
Yeah. It's there for you to receive it.
It is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he had to receive it. If he wasn't going to receive it, it wasn't going to work.
Yeah. I sent an email to somebody that was wanting some help. And at the end of the email, I just made an affirmation. I just said, by the way, a year from now, you're going to, and I just named the experience that was something she was wanting. I said, you're going to be amazed. And when they wrote back, they said, thank you so much for that addition you put on the end of the email. Why? Well, because it was hard for them to see. And when they saw someone else could hold that vision, it became easier. So that's all he was doing. He's like, you want healing. It's hard for you to receive it. Here, let this be easier.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's like the most
Permission
wonderful gift we can give. Yeah, that's right. Permission granted. Yes.
Yeah, I have this post-it. It's up here on my, it says permission granted.
There you go. That's perfect. I like that. Yeah, that's often what we need. We just need, it's almost like we need to have our conscious or a friend, which is in that kind of a friend, helping a friend situation that is kind of like, somebody else playing the role of your conscience, so to speak. But we kind of need that conscious recognition of, yeah, you got this.
I like what you said the other day. And it reminded me, you were talking about sending out good vibes, for lack of a better term, just sending out blessings or sending out the imagination of something good happening to someone or healing or whatever. And that they when they go out, they don't just disappear.
Right.
And they're helping somebody.
That's right.
And, reminded me of a type of meditation that I do where you're breathing in whatever you're holding for that person, which may be sickness or something, and you're breathing out their healing. And it's called Tonglen. It means taking and sending. And you're taking and sending. And you're usually doing it for not just one person, but maybe for a group of people. Maybe it's like, at times when I wake up and can't fall back asleep, sometimes I do Tonglen for all the other people that are laying there with insomnia, wishing they could sleep. So I take that on for them, and then I breathe out, sleeping for them. And I think about that. I'm like, I've never thought about it in the other direction, that if I need something, that there are people out there that are sending that to me. I may not know them and they don't know me, but there are people all over the world that are sending out, good things for others. And so just being open to receive it wherever it's coming from. That reminds me of the story.
Well, what you're saying, it taps into something that I kind of wish I had brought up the last time we talked about this. You mentioned how, I brought this up and we talked about how no signal, no energy that we put out there gets unused.
Right.
And very often we'll easily fall into the trap of saying, well, someone's going to get it, that one person's going to get that piece of energy. But it's not just necessarily one person. I mean, that's the beauty of these, bits of energy that we put out there. They can help large numbers of people. And that's actually how I make sense out of the idea that many people have proposed that a thought, they usually express it in terms of a positive thought. I'll express it in terms of a thought of preference of what I like. A thought that I like or a thought that I prefer is going to be 1,000 times more powerful than a thought that I don't like or don't prefer. Why? Because of that resonant effect that affects more and more and more people.
Right.
That's where the power comes in, I believe.
Yeah. Energy entrains to itself. So there's the resonance there that's going to cause it to flow better.
It really does. So
good stories.
Yeah, good stuff. Good chapter again. I mean, I'm kind of sad we're all
y'all. If anybody owes you money tonight as you're falling asleep, just imagine them getting blessed, like more jobs, more work. I don't know, the Powerball, whatever. Just imagine them being able to pay you.
Well, actually, I kind of reversed that today because I told you before the show, and I think I mentioned at the top of the hour that that check that I'd been waiting on that I knew was coming had arrived, and
Right.
and that is being used to pay off debts right now. So there are some creditors that are getting a nice chunk of cash, and
Last night they were falling asleep imagining Walt getting a
that's
check.
right. Very cool stuff. So, yeah, I can't wait to find out what's going to be in the next chapter. Meanwhile, before we sign off, tell people how to reach Cindie Chavez, the life coach, just in case they need to reach out to somebody for that bit of support.
They can reach me at my website, cindiechavez.com, CINDIECHAVEZ.com. There's a contact form there. Give me a shout. Love to hear from you.
Sounds good. Yeah, we love hearing from our listeners every single time. So thank you. I can't wait to do it again next week, but thank you for this week. It was truly special.
I'll be back.
Appreciate it. And thank you to our live streamers. Thank you especially to our podcast listeners as well. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye.